Welcome to Supreme Book Dealer. My name is Wes, and I am the Supreme Book Dealer. And here on this channel, we try to talk about everything book related. And our goal is to cultivate a community of readers. And we just love to talk about books. And for today's episode, our first episode, our inaugural episode, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite books, and that is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. Again, like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel. You can also keep the conversation going in the comments below. You can also follow us on all of our social media pages. You can check the descriptions, or you can check for that in the descriptions. And you can always email us at supremebookdealer@gmail.com. Now let's talk a little bit about Elizabeth Acevedo. Elizabeth Acevedo is a Dominican poet and writer born and raised right over the bridge in Harlem, New York. And in addition to The Poet X, she has written two other novels which I have with me, and that is With the Fire on High and Clap When You Land. And I've read both of these books, and I love them both. I think they're each amazing, but I think the real masterpiece lies in The Poet X. And if at any point during today's video you say to yourself, it looks like he's reading from something, that's because I am. I took some notes just to keep us moving along, so please forgive me if you see me reading off of a screen. All right, so let's talk about The Poet X. The Poet X is about 361 pages, depending on the copy that you have. My copy is definitely 361 pages, right? And it's paramount to say that The Poet X is written in verse, right? So it's not written in prose, it's written in verse, and it is divided into three parts. And the first part is, in the beginning was the Word. The second part, and the Word was made flesh. And the third part is the voice of one crying in the wilderness. So let's really dive into The Poet X. So The Poet X, the central protagonist, our main character, is named Xiomara Batista. And Xiomara is a 15-year-old Dominican girl growing up in Harlem, in a Harlem neighborhood, right? So Xiomara oftentimes feels unheard and unable to hide, especially ever since she kind of grew into her body, right? She's a teenager, so her body got curves, and she has learned to kind of speak with her fist and not so much her words, right? Because everybody kind of looks at her in a weird way, right? The boys are all trying to talk to her. The older people who are not her age are trying to talk to her, and this also gives a perceived notion of for her to be a certain way that is completely untrue, right? So, with that being said, she does have a voice, and she does want to use her voice, and she does pour her words, her emotions, her feelings onto the pages of her leather journal, right? Or her leather notebook. I don't want to say it's a journal. It's a leather notebook, right? So, Xiomara also has a twin brother named Xavier. Xiomara and Xavier, right? Xavier is very smart and very religious, just like her mom, right? So she calls Xavier twin. She rarely ever calls him Xavier, with the exception of one time that I can think of when she goes to Xavier's school after he comes home with like a bruise, or he looks like somebody kind of beat him up. So she goes to her school and she actually calls him Xavier and not Twin. That's one of the only times, it might be the only time in the book that she actually did it, but I can't remember. So forgive me. Ziomara's mom, like I said, is super religious. And because of that, that's going to cause a lot of conflict and tension throughout the book. Her father, Ziomara's father, is present, but yet absent. Like he's there, but he's so detached and so removed from the family that it feels like he isn't there at all. But he is there. Just feels like he's not. So let's also talk about Ziomara has a best friend named Caridad, and she is very religious, like her mom and like Xavier. Ziomara isn't as religious. She does go to church, but she questions her faith a lot. That also gives a lot of tension between her and her mom. So let's talk about Twin. Because Twin is a very important character in this book. And the dynamic between the relationship between Ziomara and Twin is interesting and compelling. So Twin is much different because Ziomara always refers to him as being very smart. Right? He does very well in school. He's academically inclined in ways that Ziomara isn't. And that's not to say she doesn't do good in school, but Twin is very good at STEM, like science, engineering, math, stuff like that. That's where Twin really kind of thrives, and Ziomara thrives with writing, with the word, right? So that's kind of shows how different they are, and it also Ziomara alludes that her mom kind of treats Twin better. She feels like the mom loves Twin more. And there's two reasons for that. The first is because he was born, although they are twins, he was born first. And when it was Ziomara's turn, her mom had a lot of complications when giving birth to her. She could have actually died. So that also gives a little bit of complexity to the relationship between not only Ziomara and Twin, but Ziomara and her mom. So where are we at? So it's also safe to say that Ziomara feels like it's very unfair because Twin doesn't really have to clean, doesn't have to cook, and yet Ziomara has to do all of these things. So it's a very traditional gender role going on in the house, right? So Ziomara is the girl, she cooks, she cleans. Twin doesn't have to do any of that, right? So that's another aspect of their family dynamic. So let's talk about relationships, romance. So Ziomara catches feelings from a boy named Aman. And Aman is in her bio class. And her and Aman really, they start flirting at first, and then it turns into them hanging out, and then they really develop a very, very nice romance, right? At least I thought so throughout the book. It's very compelling. Another character to introduce is Miss Galliano, right? So Miss Galliano is her English teacher. And Miss Galliano is an important character because she invites Ziomara to join the Poetry Slam Club and tries to get her into performing her poems, which at first Ziomara is really apprehensive about doing it because she knows that her mom is going to react negatively to it, which, as we find out later in the book, she was 100% correct in that assessment. So that's kind of the lay of the land as far as characters go. We have another character, Father Sean, who is, like the church. I think he's the pastor of the church, but he might be the priest. But yeah, so that's kind of where all the characters fall into play. So there are two huge boiling points in this story. And the first boiling point is Ziomara's romance with Amon. So as I said, Ziomara's romance with Amon steadily gets deeper. So first they start hanging out at the park, listening to music. Then they go to this Halloween party where they both just so happen to pick green superheroes. But it really culminates at the point where they go ice skating, right? So Amon and Ziomara go ice skating. And then when they're on the train going home, they're doing a little PDA, right? And one of Ziomara's mom's friends sees them doing it. And of course, she goes back and tells Ziomara's mom. So when Ziomara gets home, it's like all hell to pay. Her mom is flipping out, calling her all types of names. Her father's calling her names. They really do not take it well. And so that's one way that the relationship between Ziomara and her mom, that's like there's a huge division now, right? The second boiling point of the story is when Ziomara joins the poetry club, right? And the reason why this is a huge issue is because when she joins the poetry club, she's skipping out on her confirmation class. And that's very big because Ziomara's mom wanted her to make confirmation because for the last couple of years, she's had excuses. She's had excuses of why she couldn't do it. So she was cutting those classes and she was going to the poetry club. And when her mom found out, she flips out to the point where she even burns Ziomara's journal, like burns it, lights it on fire. And it's a very sad moment throughout the story. So to make a long story short, they go to counseling with Father Sean. They slowly repair their relationship. I wouldn't say it's 100% at the end of the story, but I would also say it wasn't 100% at the beginning of the story. But they do slowly repair their relationship. And Ziomara ends up reading a poem at an open mic. It goes very well. And then she enters the poetry slam. She reads her poems. She reads her poem, and it is received very, very well. A couple of other things to talk about is Twin, right? So we find out later, not really later, but we find out in the book that Twin is gay, right? And that's a big conflict because of how religious Twin is. And at the end of the story, Twin never tells their mom, so we don't know how the mom would react to Twin being gay. But it is another very, very big kind of like subplot of the story, right? Twin ends up having a boyfriend. He ends up moving. Twin becomes heartbroken. But it is a very, it's a very big plot throughout the story, but like a subplot, but still very intriguing nonetheless. And at the end of the story, there's like a big party kind of to celebrate Ziomara doing the poetry slam. Amon is there, although they don't really acknowledge, the parents don't really acknowledge Amon as the boyfriend, although that's what he is. But it's a very nice way to end the book. And that's the Poet X. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. But let me read to you one of my favorite poems of this story. And it is on page 74. And I'll explain why I really enjoy this poem, right? It's called Sharing. Although Twin and I are super different, people find it strange how much we share. We shared the same womb, the same cradle, and our whole lives the same room. Mommy wanted to find a bigger apartment. Told Poppy we should move to Queens or somewhere far from Harlem, where we could each have our own room. But apparently, although Poppy had changed, he still stood unmoved. Said everything we could want was here, and sharing a room wouldn't kill us. And it hasn't, except I once heard a rumor that goldfish have an evolutionary gene where they'll only develop as big as the tank they're put into. They need space to stretch, and I wonder if Twin and I are keeping each other small, taking up the space that would have let the other grow. And I think that is such an amazing poem. I think the comparison of space to goldfish and how you grow um, you grow in the environment that you in. I think it's not only important in this book, but it's important just for people in general because there are so many people that are not allowed the opportunity to grow, right? Until they leave a specific space. But that's all I have to really talk about the Poet X. If you have any comments, please put it in the comment section. And if you want to continue the conversation going, you can always reach out to me. Like I said, social media is in the description. Email is in the description. I look forward to seeing you for our next episode. I'm really excited for that. And I just want to say, keep reading.